Did you know that hunter-gatherers, like the Hadzabe, can walk through the bush and instantly spot which plants are food, which are medicine, and which can kill you? Meanwhile, most of us would probably snap a photo before we even wondered if that berry is safe. It's not just a knowledge gap. It's a mismatch between the world our bodies were built for and the world we actually live in. Your ancestors handed down survival instincts honed over thousands of years, but you've traded them for the reflex to check your phone. Here's the twist. The real unseen predator in the Stone Age isn't a saber-toothed cat or a hidden snake. It's your own body, suddenly forced to survive without the comforts and protections you take for granted. And when you step into that ancient world, your body is about to show you just how unprepared it really is. The first hour, your body betrays you. In the first hour, your body reacts in ways you never expected. The second you leave behind your familiar world, your heart starts pounding, sweat prickles your skin, and your muscles ache after just a few minutes of real work. This isn't just nerves. Your body is in shock. Years spent in temperature-controlled rooms and eating processed food have left your systems unprepared for real exertion. That sudden stitch in your side after scrambling up a hill, it's your diaphragm struggling with movement it rarely does. If you stand up too fast and feel dizzy, it's because your blood pressure can't keep up without the subtle support of elevators and ergonomic chairs. But it's not just your muscles and heart that struggle. Your skin is another weak link. Imagine brushing against a thorn and getting a scratch so small you'd ignore it at home. Out here, that tiny cut is a serious threat. Modern immune systems, shaped by clean water and antibacterial soap, are missing much of the gut microbe variety that traditional hunter-gatherers have. Your ancestors' bodies learned to handle a world full of bacteria. Yours is primed to panic at the first sign of dirt. If you've ever taken antibiotics, you've probably wiped out entire colonies of helpful gut bacteria. Those missing microbes would have helped you fight off new infections. In the Stone Age, there's no hospital, no antibiotics on standby. That little infection can spread fast, and your body isn't ready for the onslaught. Bacteria that your great-great-grandparents shrugged off now have a field day, multiplying with nothing to stop them. Even the air is a challenge. Out in nature, every breath brings in pollen, spores, and dust your city-trained lungs aren't used to. What feels like fresh air makes your sinuses swell and your eyes water. For Stone Age people, breathing this in every day built up their defenses. For you, it's just another way your body gets overwhelmed. Your sweat tells a similar story. Modern deodorants kill the bacteria that once protected your skin. Now, when your feet touch the ground, the unfamiliar microbes in the soil can cause your skin to react, leaving you itchy or rashy from simple contact with earth. Even chewing can become a chore. Roots and wild foods are tough, and your jaw tires quickly, while Stone Age children handled them with ease. By the end of the first hour, you're already sore, itchy, and short of breath. None of this is due to injury or attack. It's just your body failing at the basics. And all of this happens before you ever face hunger or a predator. So why would your body turn on you so fast? The deadly drink. A clear stream rushes over smooth stones, sparkling in the sunlight. It looks safe, almost inviting. But this isn't the treated water you're used to. Every sip here comes loaded with microorganisms your gut has never met. Giardia lamblia, a parasite found in many wild waters, can cause cramps that feel like glass twisting in your belly. Dysentery bacteria drift alongside, ready to trigger violent diarrhea and rapid dehydration. These dangers weren't rare. Intestinal parasites were common in ancient times. People living then adapted over generations. But your body faces these threats with no built-in defenses. Modern water treatment didn't just make water taste better. It changed our biology. Before chlorination, people drank from streams full of microbes and built up resistance. Studies of traditional populations show their gut microbiomes are much richer in parasite-fighting bacteria than those of urban dwellers. Your intestinal flora, shaped by bottled water and kitchen taps, is unprepared for this invisible onslaught. You might think boiling the water is an easy fix. But without a proper container, it's nearly impossible. Try heating water in your hands over a fire. Good luck. Even if you manage to gather water in a leaf or shell, keeping it at a rolling boil for several minutes is a challenge without modern tools. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking. After just 8 hours without safe water, your thinking gets fuzzy. You start making mistakes, right when you need your wits the most. Look closer at the stream bank. The mud is crisscrossed with hoof prints and paw marks, signs that animals drink here too. Their saliva and waste add even more pathogens to the water, turning each mouthful into a gamble. Soon, the cramps hit. Your gut tries to expel the invaders with waves of pain, but it's too late. Parasites latch onto your intestines. Fever sets in as your immune system scrambles. Diarrhea drains away your fluids and salts, leaving you weaker with every hour. The water you drank for survival now speeds up your decline. All of this happens quietly. There's no dramatic attack, just a steady breakdown as microscopic threats take over. Your ancestors drank from streams like this every day, but they carried generations of built-in resistance. Their purification system lived in their guts. Yours is outsourced to treatment plants you've never seen. By sunrise, you're too weak to even crawl. So how did our ancestors drink from this very stream every day? The fire that wasn't. The first real problem hits you as the sun sets and the temperature drops. Suddenly, you realize there's no matches, no lighter, no easy way to spark a flame. All those survival shows made fire starting look like a neat trick. But now it's you, a pile of sticks, and a sinking feeling that this is much harder than it looks. You try the bow drill method, spinning a wooden spindle against a board, hoping friction will do the trick. But your hands slip, the cord unravels, and the wood you grabbed is damp from dew. Stone Age people spent weeks curing the right woods. You're just guessing. Even with the best materials, you need steady pressure and a rhythm your arms can't keep up with. Most novices fail within the first hour, and you're no exception. Every method you try, bow drill, hand drill, fire plow, demands precision and calloused hands that you simply don't have. Your palms blister and your shoulders ache. When a wisp of smoke finally curls up, it's a brief flash of hope. You lean in, coaxing the ember, but the moment you try to move it, it fizzles out against the cold ground. The effort leaves your hands raw, your nerves on edge, and your confidence draining away with the daylight. Without fire, the consequences stack up quickly. There's no warmth as the air cools, no way to boil water and make it safe, and nothing to keep predators at bay. Your sweat-soaked clothes start to chill you, and every shadow in the darkness feels like a threat. Hypothermia creeps in even when the temperature isn't freezing. Just a damp night and a tired body are enough. Studies of survival situations show that most failures trace back to this moment, fireless, cold, and exposed. What's even more humbling is that your ancestors didn't just make fire. They treated it like a precious tool, keeping embers alive for days and teaching children the skill from a young age. You, on the other hand, are left in the dark, shivering, with nothing to show for hours of effort except a pile of broken sticks and bleeding hands. And without fire, every other survival tactic falls apart. Now, as you stare at your aching hands, you start to realize just how much you depend on them, and how unprepared they truly are for the world you've been thrown into. Soft hands, hard reality. Your hands, so familiar in daily life, become a liability the instant you try to use them for anything beyond a keyboard or a steering wheel. The reality sets in as you attempt the simplest survival tasks. Stripping bark to make cordage, you barely get started before your palms redden and sting. Digging for edible roots, your nails split and bend against hard-packed earth. With every scrape and tug, your skin blisters and thin layers peel away. Archaeological finds show Stone Age hands with much stronger muscle attachments, evidence of a lifetime spent gripping, pulling, and scraping. Your own hands, shaped by years of gentle use, can't keep up. Where ancient fingers built up toughened skin and thick calluses, yours form blisters and open wounds in minutes. Trying to fashion a tool out of flint, you quickly discover another hard truth. Stone Age flint workers practiced for years to master the right angles and pressure. Your first attempts leave the stone fractured in useless chips, your fingers sore and raw. Each slip risks a cut, and every cut is a new invitation for infection. Without gloves or bandages, every mistake lingers long after the task ends. Even simple gripping becomes a struggle. When you try to climb a low tree for a better view or shelter, your fingers slide off the bark. Modern fingerprints are smooth and shallow from lack of heavy use, while traditional hunter-gatherers develop deep whorls and ridges that help them hold on to slippery surfaces. The strength just isn't there. Your grip falters when holding a digging stick, and your thinner muscles, those pads at the base of your thumbs, tire quickly, dropping tools you desperately need to hold. Fine motor skills, which seem so advanced when texting or typing, suddenly fall short. Tying knots with plant fibers, your fingers fumble and can't twist tight enough to hold. Stone Age people perform delicate tasks, hafting arrowheads, weaving nets, with a precision your hands can't match. Neurological studies show their brains devoted more space to hand control, refined by years of practice. Your thumbs, quick for swiping, lack the strength and endurance for real work. Pain tolerance is another hurdle. The shock from a splinter under your nail or a scrape along your knuckle makes you pause. Ancient remains show healed fractures and joint damage, proof they kept working through injuries that would send you to urgent care. Your threshold for discomfort, shaped by a world of minor paper cuts and soft surfaces, gives out fast. By midday, swelling and stiffness creep in. Joints ache from unfamiliar motions, and open wounds attract dirt and insects. Each new task becomes harder as your dexterity fades. Building shelter, hunting, or even carrying water turns into a painful challenge. Your ancestors' hands were their primary survival tools, hardened from the first years of life. Yours have forgotten how to do what humans at birth once learned by age 2. And just as you start to wonder how much worse it can get, the world around you reminds you that your hands aren't your only vulnerability. The silent killer. Weather. You reach for your phone instinctively, but there's no weather app here. No forecast, no radar, no warning that the temperature will drop 20 degrees after sunset. Stone Age weather doesn't follow a predictable schedule. That breeze that felt refreshing at noon, by dusk, it's stealing your body heat faster than you can replace it. Modern humans live in a climate-controlled bubble. Studies show office workers spend 93% of their time indoors at stable temperatures. Your body lost its ability to handle real weather fluctuations. When the temperature dips to 50 degrees, your fingers stiffen. At 40 degrees, you shiver uncontrollably. Hypothermia begins when core temperature drops just 2 degrees, something your ancestors shrugged off daily. Rain becomes your worst enemy. Without Gore-Tex or umbrellas, a moderate downpour soaks you to the skin in minutes. Wet clothes lose insulation value 25 times faster than dry ones. Your teeth chatter as wind exploits this weakness. Neolithic people wore water-repellent animal hides treated with fats. You're stuck with cotton that clings like a cold sponge. Shelter isn't optional here. It's survival. Try building a debris hut like you've seen in videos. Your first attempt collapses under its own weight. Proper insulation requires layers of leaves 18 inches thick, angled precisely to shed rain. Archaeological sites reveal Stone Age shelters use sophisticated designs, interwoven branches, angled entrances blocking wind, even primitive weatherproofing with clay and moss. Your pile of sticks barely blocks sunlight. Nightfall brings the real test. Without modern lighting, darkness isn't just inconvenient, it's deadly. Your pupils dilate to compensate, but city dwellers' eyes adapt 40% slower than hunter-gatherers. You stumble over roots, unable to see terrain that Stone Age people navigated effortlessly. Moonlight alone won't save you. Cloud cover reduces its brightness by 90%. Your body's temperature regulation fails next. Urbanites maintain a narrow 97 to 99 degree F range. Indigenous Arctic populations naturally fluctuate between 95 to 100 degrees without harm. When your core drops to 95 degree fins, confusion sets in. At 93 degrees, you lose coordination. Ancient humans slept through these dips regularly. Your metabolism panics at the first sign of variation. Morning brings no relief. The sun bakes your exposed skin. You forgot sunscreen exists. Paleolithic people had melanin adaptations we've since lost. Your skin reddens within an hour. Dehydration follows as sweat pours from unequipped pores. Your body tries to cool itself, but without electrolyte replacements, cramps lock your legs. Weather kills quietly here. No lightning strikes or blizzards required. Just ordinary conditions your biology no longer recognizes. That pleasant 70-degree afternoon? It's a warning. Your ancestors read these signs instinctively. Cloud patterns, animal behavior, wind shifts. You notice nothing until it's too late. By the second night, your fingers turn waxy white, early frostbite. Your shelter leaks. The fire you finally started sputters in damp wood. Shivering burns precious calories you can't spare. Stone Age people survived these conditions through generations of accumulated knowledge, which you lack completely. The forecast? Grim. Your modern body expects 72 degrees and partly cloudy forever. The Stone Age offers no such guarantees. Without climate control, you're at the mercy of elements that shaped human evolution. And now, your demise. The weather doesn't hate you. It simply doesn't care that you exist. And that indifference proves deadlier than any predator. Lost instincts. That red berry looks perfectly edible, plump, glossy, just like the ones at the grocery store. But here's the problem. Your brain lacks the ancient warning systems that kept your ancestors alive. Stone Age humans could recognize poisonous plants instinctively, their subconscious screaming danger before they even touched lethal foliage. Your instincts? They're busy reminding you to check Instagram. Poisonous plants don't always look threatening. Some mimic edible varieties perfectly. Take water hemlock. Its roots resemble wild carrots but contain a toxin that shuts down your nervous system in hours. Modern foraging guides list over 50 deadly plants in North America alone. Studies tracking urban volunteers show 93% can't identify common poison ivy, let alone more subtle threats. Your ancestors didn't need field guides. Their brains flagged dangers automatically through generations of hardwired experience. Even safe plants can kill without proper preparation. Acorns contain tannic acid that shreds your kidneys unless leached with water. Cassava, a staple for many indigenous groups, produces cyanide unless processed correctly. Ethnographic records show Stone Age children learned these protocols through years of supervised gathering. You might recall a half-remembered scene from a survival movie. Animal threats compound the problem. That oddly colored frog isn't just ugly. Its skin secretes batrachotoxin, some 200 times deadlier than cyanide. Your instincts should scream retreat, but millennia of supermarket safety dulled that response. Research comparing modern humans to isolated tribes found urban dwellers take 3 seconds longer to recognize snake patterns, an eternity when venom's involved. Your senses fail you completely. Stone Age noses could sniff out rotting meat from yards away, a critical skill before refrigeration. Your nose, accustomed to air fresheners and filtered air, misses the warning stench of spoiled food. Experiments show modern humans identify only 20% of dangerous odors that hunter-gatherers detect instantly. The knowledge gap starts shockingly young. Hadza toddlers in Tanzania can identify 30 edible plants by age 4. Your childhood taught you to distinguish Cheerios from Fruit Loops, not deadly nightshade from blackberries. Anthropologists found Western 4-year-olds score worse on plant identification tests than chimpanzees. Seasonal changes add another layer of danger. Plants that are edible in spring might be toxic in fall. Stone Age people tracked these cycles religiously. Their survival depended on it. You barely notice when Starbucks switches from pumpkin spice to peppermint mocha. Fear responses are broken too. Your ancestors felt visceral dread near cliff edges or stagnant water. Adaptive instincts preventing falls or disease. Modern safety nets erase those warnings. Theme park studies show people lean dangerously over railings their bodies should instinctively avoid. The cruelest part, your brain still has the capacity for these instincts. They're just buried under layers of modern complacency. MRI scans reveal urbanites process natural threats in cognitive centers, while tribal groups use faster, subconscious pathways. You have to think about danger. They sense it. By day's end, you're starving but terrified to eat anything. Every berry cluster could hide death. That mushroom looks like the one on your pizza last week. But was it really the same? Your ancestors would laugh at your hesitation. If they weren't too busy surviving effortlessly on knowledge baked into their very DNA, you're left with a brutal realization. The supermarket didn't just feed you. It deleted the most basic survival software your species ever developed. Now, every meal is Russian roulette, and your instincts are empty chambers. Stone Age children could have foraged safely here. You'll likely poison yourself by lunch. The wilderness isn't more dangerous now. You're just far less equipped to handle it than any human in history. The tools you can't make you need to cut rope, or skin an animal, or carve wood. But you don't have a knife, and you have no idea how to make one. That's your first realization in the Stone Age. Every tool you've ever used was made by someone else. Flint knapping looks simple when experts do it. Strike a rock to get a sharp edge. Your first attempt sends shards flying in random directions. One slice opens your thigh. Proper technique requires hitting at exact 20-degree angles with precise force. Too soft, and the rock won't fracture. Too hard, and it shatters uselessly. Anthropologists estimate Stone Age toolmakers practiced for 5+ years before producing usable blades. Your YouTube tutorial memory won't cut it. Even finding the right stone proves impossible. Modern eyes, accustomed to plastic and metal, can't identify workable flint or obsidian. Geologic surveys show only 8% of surface stones are knappable. Ancient toolmakers traveled miles to specific quarries. You grab whatever vaguely sharp-looking rock you stumble across. It crumbles on first strike. Hafting presents another nightmare. Even if you somehow make a blade, attaching it to a handle requires processed sinew or plant fibers. Without glue or nails, you need to split wood for tension bindings. But that requires a knife you don't have. Archaeologists find Stone Age tools with microscopic wear patterns, proving specialized craftsmen made them. Your attempt looks like a toddler's art project. Basic survival tasks become impossible without proper tools. Try butchering game with a rock shard. You'll waste 70% of the meat. Ethnographic studies of modern hunter-gatherers show proper blades increase calorie extraction by 400%. Without them, you're chewing through hide and bone like some feral animal. Fishing. Forget hooks. Native Americans carved bone barbs so precise they could catch salmon mid-leap. Your bent twig snags nothing. Even gathering plants requires tools. Digging sticks for roots, baskets for transport. Replicative archaeology shows Stone Age women wove usable baskets in 3 hours. Your tangled grass bundle falls apart instantly. Needle making highlights at the skill gap. Ancient sewing needles had eyes smaller than modern ones, carved from bone with stone drills. Try replicating that without magnifying glasses. Without needles, you can't repair clothing or make shelters. Cold wind whips through your deteriorating clothes, and you've got no way to fix them. The axe problem might be worst. Felling trees requires a hafted stone axe weighing 2 to 3 pounds. But making the handle needs an axe. It's a catch-22. Dendrochronology studies reveal Neolithic people felled 100-year-old oaks in under an hour with polished stone axes. You couldn't cut through a sapling in a day. We've outsourced tool making so completely that most people can't even sharpen a kitchen knife properly. Primitive technology videos make it look easy because you're watching experts with decades of practice. Actually trying it reveals the ugly truth. You lack the fundamental motor skills your ancestors mastered before puberty. Toolmaking wasn't just a useful skill in the Stone Age, it was the skill. Everything else depended on it. Now you're left staring at a pile of rocks, realizing you can't even make the tool that makes other tools. Your ancestors didn't survive because they were stronger. They survived because their hands held generations of accumulated knowledge yours will never know. The convenience of modernity didn't just save us labor. It deleted entire categories of essential human ability. You may have opposable thumbs, but in this world, they might as well be decorative. Every failed attempt at napping drives home the same lesson. Civilization isn't just about having tools. It's about remembering how to make them from nothing. And that's knowledge we've happily erased from our collective memory. Your distant relatives would pity you, a human surrounded by raw materials, starving because you can't transform them into usefulness. Hunger's deadly gamble. After 2 days without food, your stomach stops growling and starts making decisions. That mushroom looks similar to the button mushrooms at the grocery store. The rabbit carcass you found smells only slightly off. Normally, you'd never consider eating these, but hunger rewires your judgment in dangerous ways. Stone Age humans face this dilemma constantly. Analysis of ancient coprolites, fossilized feces, shows our ancestors regularly consumed foods we'd consider inedible. Rotten meat, toxic plants, even clay. They developed physiological adaptations to handle these risks. Your modern gut can't process what theirs did effortlessly. That slightly spoiled meat contains enterotoxins that will leave you vomiting within hours. The edible-looking plant carries enough solanine to paralyze your diaphragm. Research on hunger-induced risk-taking shows fascinating patterns. After just 24 hours without food, people will eat things they'd normally reject. Hadza hunter-gatherers purposefully eat bitter, toxic tubers during famines, but only after meticulous preparation involving days of soaking and cooking. You lack both the knowledge and patience for these methods. Your attempts at cooking quicken the bacteria's growth instead of killing it. Nutritional deficiencies start altering your cognition before you realize it. The average Western diet contains over 60% fewer micronutrients than Paleolithic diets did. Without adequate magnesium and zinc, your brain struggles with basic risk assessment. That's why that questionable berry suddenly seems worth trying. Malnutrition clouds your judgment more efficiently than any drug. Raw food presents another trap. Your ancestors ate some meats and plants raw, but only specific ones prepared specific ways. Inuit populations consume raw seal liver for vitamin C, but know to avoid the toxic levels of vitamin A in polar bear liver. You'll try eating that fish raw and get a lethal dose of thiaminase, an enzyme that destroys vitamin B1 in your body. The hunger shake set in by day 3. Your hands tremble too much to peel bark or dig roots properly. Ethnographic studies show hunter-gatherers could identify 20 different appetite-suppressing plants during shortages. You vaguely remember hearing about pine needle tea, but fail to distinguish toxic yew from edible white pine. Starvation triggers desperate measures. You attempt to eat the inner bark of trees, chewing painfully through the tough fibers. What you don't know is that some tree cambium contains cyanogenic glycosides. Ancient northern tribes processed birch bark for weeks to remove these toxins. You swallow them straight. Even successful hunting brings danger. That rabbit you caught carries tularemia, a bacterial infection ancient immune systems recognized, but yours doesn't. Without proper butchering techniques, you contaminate the meat with gut contents. Cooking would help, but your weak fire can't reach safe temperatures. The final irony: your body starts consuming itself before you find adequate food. Autophagy, self-cannibalism at the cellular level, begins after 48 hours without eating. This process sustains Stone Age humans through lean periods. Your nutrient-depleted modern physiology does it inefficiently, burning muscle instead of fat. Every survival guide says, don't eat unless you're certain. But certainty disappears with hunger. Your ancestors developed fail-safes for these moments, testing foods on their skin first, observing what animals ate, cooking everything thoroughly. You have only grocery store assumptions and a stomach that's now deciding for you. In the end, it's not predators or exposure that gets you. It's a handful of pretty red berries you were 70% sure were safe. Your ancestors would call this natural selection. You'd call it unfair. Both would be right. The Stone Age didn't just test strength. It tested judgment under duress. and yours failed the moment hunger started doing your thinking. Conclusion: the Stone Age wasn't just a period. It was the ultimate survival exam. Your ancestors passed it daily. You'd fail before lunch. Modern comforts erased skills that took millennia to develop. That slow Wi-Fi you complained about yesterday. Try finding water without dying first. We've traded rugged instincts for convenience. The Hadzabe still identify 90% of local plants at a glance. You check Yelp reviews for restaurants. One perspective? Spend a day without your phone. Notice when frustration hits. That's your modern privilege crumbling. No ancient human ever panicked over a dead battery. They were too busy staying alive. Our problems aren't harder. We've just forgotten what real problems feel like. Ancient Rome, not as a senator or gladiator, but as one of the millions of slaves who powered the empire. Your body isn't yours, it's property. Your choices aren't yours. They're dictated by a master who could sell your children or beat you without consequence. This wasn't the exception. It was the brutal norm for nearly a third of Rome's population. Today, we're uncovering the hidden engine of the empire, the lives of those who built it in chains, the silent majority in the heart of Rome. Daily life unfolded in crowded streets, noisy marketplaces, and towering apartment blocks. But hidden behind the city's energy was a reality that shaped everything. Enslaved people made up a significant share of the urban population, perhaps 30 to 50% in some districts. Rome was not just a city of citizens and senators. It was a city of silent laborers whose presence defined the rhythm of every day. The scale of slavery in the capital was staggering. At its peak, Italy itself may have had up to 40% of its population enslaved, and nowhere was this more visible than in Rome. The wealthy elite made slave ownership a public symbol of status. Senators and powerful families kept hundreds, sometimes thousands, of enslaved people in their households. These weren't just cooks or cleaners. They were tutors, scribes, hairdressers, secretaries, and even actors, each one assigned to a specific task, each one essential to the smooth running of a grand Roman home. This culture of ownership trickled down. Middle-class families, too, aspired to keep at least a few slaves. The poet Horace, who considered himself modestly well off, mentioned having 8 slaves on his small country estate. Even shopkeepers, bakers, and craftsmen might own 1 or 2. For many Romans, having someone else to do the dirty work, fetch water, carry goods, run errands, was as normal as owning a tool or a piece of furniture. It was a mark of having made it. The result was a city where enslaved people were everywhere, yet rarely seen for who they were. They swept the floors of temples, tended fires in the public baths, and carried water up endless flights of stairs in the city's crowded insulae, those multi-story apartment blocks where most Romans lived. They worked in bakeries before dawn, loaded carts at the docks, and kept the fountains flowing. For the urban poor, the presence of slaves was both a reminder of their own precarious status, and sometimes a distant aspiration. Owning even one slave could be a step up the social ladder. The demand for labor fueled an enormous, relentless trade. Delos, an island in the Aegean, became the Mediterranean's largest slave market. During peak seasons, thousands of captives were sold there daily. Ships arrived packed with people from every corner of the empire, the spoils of war, victims of piracy, and the unlucky caught in debt. Traders moved quickly, inspecting teeth, checking muscles, and asking questions about skills. A strong farmhand might be worth a decent sum, while an educated Greek or a skilled artisan could fetch a price that would take years for a free laborer to earn. Once in Rome, enslaved people were sorted, sold, and scattered across the city. Some were brought in bulk for dangerous work in mines or on farms. Others were hand-picked for their beauty, intelligence, or specific talents. The most expensive slaves were often those who could read and write, or who had specialized skills: doctors, teachers, musicians. But for every prized acquisition, there were thousands destined for back-breaking labor, or short, brutal lives in the worst jobs the city had to offer. The city's economy depended on this constant influx of new slaves. They built the aqueducts that brought fresh water, harvested the grain that filled the public granaries, and rowed the ships that supplied the city with food and goods. They maintained the roads, cleaned the sewers, and even entertained the crowds in the arenas. Without their labor, Rome's grand public works and daily comforts would have ground to a halt. But the supply of slaves was not infinite. When Rome's conquest slowed and fewer captives arrived from the frontiers, the system began to strain. Landowners, desperate to keep their estates running, started binding free peasants, colony, to the land, a practice that foreshadowed the rise of medieval serfdom. The city's reliance on enslaved labor had created a system that could not easily adapt when the flow of new people dried up. Where did all these people come from? Most were not born into slavery. They arrived in chains after sudden, life-changing events. Pirates were a constant threat along the Mediterranean coasts, raiding villages and capturing men, women, and children to sell at the markets. The notorious Cilician pirates, operating from what is now southern Turkey, were especially feared. At their height, they commanded over 1,000 ships and enslaved an estimated 300,000 people before the Roman general Pompey finally put an end to their reign in 67 BCE. War was an even bigger source. Roman armies swept across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East, and every victory brought new captives. After Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul, he reportedly took 53,000 prisoners at Alesia alone, each one destined for a slave market. These mass enslavements were not just about profit. They were a tool of control, a way to break the resistance of conquered peoples and supply Rome's insatiable demand for labor. Debt was another trap. Under Roman law, those who could not pay what they owed could be seized and sold as slaves. This practice was so common that it sometimes sparked riots, as desperate families saw their relatives dragged away. In times of famine, parents might sell their own children, hoping at least they would be fed. Unwanted infants, especially girls, were often abandoned outside the city. Slave traders would collect these foundlings, raise them in special facilities, and sell them when they were old enough to work. Some of the city's most vulnerable residents began their lives this way. The process of turning free people into slaves was efficient and ruthless. At the markets, sellers did everything possible to maximize profits. They dyed hair to hide gray, used makeup to cover bruises, and trained slaves to appear cheerful and obedient. Young women and children were posed to look appealing. Skilled men were advertised for their abilities. Traders knew how to spot troublemakers. Those with rebellious spirits were either broken quickly or sent to the mines, where few survived long. For those who survived the journey and the sale, life in Rome could take many forms. Some found themselves in relative comfort, working in households where they might eventually win freedom. Others faced brutal conditions in fields, quarries, or galleys. The fate of each person depended on the whim of a buyer and the luck of the draw. The presence of so many enslaved people shaped every aspect of Roman life. It influenced how homes were built, how businesses operated, even how the city's laws and customs developed. Yet, despite their numbers and their importance, enslaved people remained largely invisible in the official stories of Rome. The monuments and histories celebrated emperors, generals, and philosophers, but rarely those whose labor made the city possible. Most Romans accepted the system as natural. Few questioned it. For the majority of the city's enslaved population, daily existence was a matter of survival. Their stories were rarely told, their names often forgotten, but their impact on Rome was undeniable. What's striking is that, for many, slavery was not a fate inherited at birth. Instead, it was a sudden, often violent change, a free life lost in an instant. The ways people ended up in bondage were as varied as the city itself. And understanding these paths is key to understanding Rome's story. The many roads to slavery. In Rome, losing your freedom could happen in dozens of ways. Some sudden, some slow, and almost all beyond your control. The city's sprawling slave markets didn't just fill with people born into bondage. More often, they filled with those who had started life free, only to be swept up by the empire's relentless appetite for labor. Military conquest was the most dramatic and visible route into slavery. Each Roman victory brought a flood of new captives. When Julius Caesar besieged the Gallic stronghold of Alesia, he reportedly took 53,000 prisoners in a single day, each one destined for the auction block. After the fall of Carthage at the end of the Third Punic War, the remaining 50,000 Carthaginians were marched out and sold as slaves. These mass enslavements weren't just about profit. They were a way to break the will of conquered peoples and remind everyone in Rome just how much power the state could wield. But war was only one source. The Mediterranean was plagued by pirates, especially the infamous Cilician pirates from the coast of what is now southern Turkey. These pirates didn't just attack ships, they raided coastal villages, capturing men, women, and children. They sold entire communities to slave traders. The island of Delos, sitting in the Aegean Sea, became the busiest slave market in the region, with traders processing thousands of captives at a time. It wasn't until Pompey launched a massive campaign against the Cilician pirates in 67 BCE that this particular supply chain was finally disrupted. Life in coastal towns was marked by constant anxiety. People locked their doors at night, but that was often little protection. If pirates raided, families could be torn apart in an instant. Some children ended up in the markets, not through violence, but through abandonment. Foundlings, babies left outside city gates or temples, were routinely collected by slave dealers. Girls were especially vulnerable, since they were often considered less valuable to struggling families. Contracts from the period show that even children as young as 6 could be sold into slavery, their fates decided before they ever had a chance to grow up. Economic hardship created yet another path. Debt slavery was a constant threat for the lower classes. Roman law allowed creditors to seize a debtor and their family members if bills went unpaid. This practice was so disruptive that it sparked riots and forced lawmakers to ban it at times, only for it to return whenever economic crises hit. Desperation sometimes led people to sell themselves voluntarily. One surviving contract from Pompeii records a woman named Acte agreeing to serve a buyer for 5 years in exchange for food and shelter. For many, this was a last-ditch attempt to avoid starvation. The journey from free person to slave was brutal. Captives were marched in chains to holding pens near the coast, where they waited for transport slave ships were cramped, filthy, and dangerous. Chained together in dark holds, people endured days or weeks at sea, often with little food or water. Mortality rates on these voyages could reach 20%. Those who survived were brought to quarantine pens near major ports, where dealers began sorting and evaluating them for sale. In Rome, slave markets were a fixture of city life. Two of the largest stood near the Temple of Castor in the Forum and the Septa Julia in the Campus Martius. Sellers staged their human wares for maximum profit. Slaves were washed, dressed in clean tunics, and sometimes had their hair dyed to hide grey. Olive oil was rubbed on bruises to make skin look healthier. Dealers trained slaves to smile and answer questions in rehearsed ways. Muscular men were posed with farm tools, while attractive young women were styled to appeal to buyers looking for household servants or concubines. Traders categorized slaves into tiers based on their origins, skills, and appearance. The strongest men were sent to work on farms or in the mines. Educated Greeks often became tutors, scribes, or accountants. Attractive adolescents were marketed as status symbols or companions. There were also specialized slaves, doctors, musicians, cooks, and even miners from Spain, who could identify valuable ore. Prices varied widely. A common laborer might cost 500 sesterces, about 2 months' pay for a Roman soldier. A trained Greek scribe could fetch 4 times that. The most expensive slaves, skilled artisans or strikingly beautiful young women, sold for sums that would bankrupt an average citizen. Buyers inspected slaves as if they were livestock. They checked teeth for age, prodded muscles for strength, and sometimes asked for demonstrations of skill. A Greek tutor might be asked to recite a passage from Homer. A cook could be required to prepare a sample dish. Some dealers offered short-term guarantees, promising a slave's good health for a limited time, though loopholes often favored the seller. Surviving records even include iron slave collars inscribed with return instructions in case a slave tried to escape. Not everyone went quietly. Traders quickly learned to identify rebellious or defiant captives. Some tried to break their spirits through starvation or public beatings. The most troublesome were branded on the forehead with "Fug" for fugitive, or sent straight to the mines. Life expectancy in the mines was measured in weeks. For those who resisted, the system responded with immediate and often deadly force. Once sold, a slave's fate depended entirely on the buyer's needs and whims. Some ended up in the homes of wealthy senators, where they might sleep in decent quarters and eat regular meals, but still face the constant threat of violence or sexual abuse. Others were bought by bakers or craftsmen, condemned to 16-hour days in sweltering workshops. The very unlucky were sent to the mines, where toxic fumes and brutal labor killed quickly. The system produced odd contradictions. Educated Greek slaves taught Roman children philosophy, even as they were legally classified as property. Skilled physicians, themselves slaves, treated noble patients. One famous example is Tiberius Eros, a Greek slave who became tutor to Brutus and Cassius, the very men who would later assassinate Julius Caesar. Despite their talents, these individuals could be punished or even killed at their owner's whim. The origins of Rome's slaves shifted over time. Early on, most came from Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean. As Rome's borders expanded, Gauls and Germans became more common in the markets. By the imperial era, slaves arrived from as far away as Britain and North Africa. This constant influx created a hierarchy among slaves themselves. Educated Greeks occupied the top, while unskilled laborers filled the bottom rungs. Everyone in the system lived with the knowledge that tomorrow could bring a beating, a sale, or something worse. There were also legal loopholes that could turn free people into slaves. If a free woman lived with a slave for more than a year, she could become the property of his master. Soldiers who married without official permission risked having their wives enslaved. Even the children of senators could find themselves in chains if a will was improperly witnessed and a relative exploited the loophole. The randomness of enslavement haunted free citizens. A single bad harvest, a pirate raid, or a lost lawsuit could mean the end of freedom. This ever-present threat kept the system in place. Few dared to challenge a world where anyone could fall from citizen to property overnight. But for some, the story didn't end at the auction block. Among the crowds of the newly enslaved, a handful stood out, not for their strength or beauty, but for their knowledge. These were the scholars in chains, whose minds became their most valuable asset in a world that measured people by what they could do for their masters. The scholar in chains, among the many contradictions of Roman society, none stood out more than the role of the scholar in chains. The city's elite clamored for the best education for their children, yet they depended on enslaved intellectuals to provide it. These highly skilled individuals lived at the intersection of privilege and powerlessness, shaping the minds of Rome's future leaders, while being denied even the most basic rights themselves. Greek tutors were especially prized after Rome's conquest of Greece. Educated captives flooded the markets, and their value soared. Greek tutors cost 6,000 to 8,000 sesterces, 3 to 4 times more than a farmhand. For the wealthy, this was a small price to pay for the prestige of having a household philosopher or mathematician. These tutors taught everything from Homer and philosophy to advanced mathematics and rhetoric. Some elite families boasted entire teams of Greek specialists, each one responsible for a different subject. The demand for educated slaves extended far beyond the classroom. Roman households needed physicians, secretaries, accountants, and administrators, roles that required years of training. The philosopher Pliny the Elder depended on his slave secretary Hermes to handle all his correspondence and daily business, a testament to how much Roman intellectual life relied on enslaved expertise. The poet Horace openly credited his slave Davus with helping him compose verses, and it's likely that many other works attributed to famous Romans were, in fact, shaped or even ghost-written by slaves whose names have been lost to history. Despite their enormous influence, these scholars lived under constant threat. Their talents could win them a place at the dinner table, where they recited poetry or debated philosophy with their masters and guests. But a single misstep, an error in teaching, a perceived slight, or simply the whim of an owner, could result in punishment, sale, or separation from everything familiar. Some masters willed their favorite scholar slaves to friends, treating them as prized possessions to be gifted or traded. Even in the best circumstances, their existence was precarious. Educated slaves often dined better than laborers in the fields or workshops and usually escaped the harshest physical labor. Yet, their daily lives were full of tension and uncertainty. One day, they might advise their master on political matters or manage the household's finances. The next, they could be sent away to pay off a debt or because of a change in fortune. Their legal status never changed. They remained property, unable to own land, marry legally, or enter contracts. Some found subtle ways to resist or reclaim a sliver of autonomy. Acts of sabotage, deliberately teaching lessons that encouraged critical thinking or quietly undermining a cruel master, were not unknown. There are accounts of physician slaves giving less effective treatments to abusive owners or tutors, emphasizing the values of Greek democracy over Roman authoritarianism. Such resistance was risky, but it allowed enslaved scholars to assert a measure of control in a system designed to deny them agency. The social dynamics inside Roman households could be bizarre. An educated slave might be entrusted with the family's finances, making decisions that affected everyone in the home, yet still be forced to eat leftovers in the kitchen, separated from the family's table. The philosopher Seneca once described visiting a friend whose trusted slave accountant managed all household accounts, but was still treated as less than human. This disconnect was not lost on the slaves themselves, who navigated a world where their skills were revered but their personhood was denied. For many, the best hope was manumission, the chance to be freed by a grateful master. Some educated slaves did achieve freedom, often continuing to serve as teachers, doctors, or scribes as clients of their former owners. But freedom came with its own complications. Most freedmen remained tied to their ex-masters through networks of patronage, and without Roman citizenship, many struggled to find work outside the household that once owned them. A few, like Gaius Julius Hyginus, who became director of the Palatine Library, or Tiro, who invented a shorthand system after being freed by Cicero, achieved remarkable success. But these were rare exceptions. The majority of educated slaves remained in bondage until death, their contributions unacknowledged. The contradiction at the heart of this system was glaring. Rome's elite depended on enslaved intellects for everything from teaching their children to managing their estates, yet insisted these same people were incapable of citizenship or basic autonomy. Some aristocrats argued for better treatment of educated slaves, not out of compassion, but because it was economically sensible to protect such a valuable asset. A senator might spend a fortune on a Greek accountant, but still believe that person was fundamentally inferior. Educated slaves also faced unique psychological pressures. Unlike field laborers or miners, who often shared their misery with others, scholar slaves were frequently isolated, the only literate person in the household with no peers to confide in. Some developed nervous habits or turned to alcohol to cope with the stress of constantly shifting between the roles of trusted advisor and disposable property. Their lives were a balancing act, requiring them to anticipate the moods and expectations of their masters while suppressing their own ambitions and frustrations. Their impact on Roman society was enormous. Educated slaves introduced Greek literature and philosophy to Roman schools, advanced medical knowledge, and managed the daily affairs of the empire's wealthiest families. The Greek tutor Andronicus is credited with bringing Homer's works into Roman education. Slave physicians treated noble patients and sometimes introduced new treatments to Roman medicine. The spread of Christianity among slaves may have been accelerated by educated servants who recognized the appeal of spiritual equality in a society that denied them basic rights. Yet this influence made them targets. After major slave revolts, Roman authorities grew suspicious of educated slaves, fearing that their knowledge and communication skills could inspire rebellion. Laws were passed to restrict their ability to gather or teach certain subjects, and some households removed books and writing materials from slave quarters after uprisings. The satirist Juvenal even mocked the paranoia of wealthy Romans who feared their Greek tutors might poison them, a reflection of the underlying anxiety about the power of enslaved minds. The tension between dependence and distrust ran through every aspect of the scholar-slave's life. Rome prided itself on culture and learning, but much of that achievement rested on the backs of people who were denied the very freedoms they helped to promote. city's libraries, schools, and even government offices relied on the work of enslaved intellectuals. Yet Roman law offered them no protection. Their talents were exploited for the glory of their masters, and their names were rarely recorded in the history books. For most, the hope of freedom was slim. Surviving records show that while some scholar slaves were eventually manumitted, the majority remained in bondage, their fates dependent on the whims of their owners. Even those who gained their freedom often found themselves economically dependent on former masters, unable to escape the shadow of their past. While the lives of educated slaves were marked by contradiction and uncertainty, they still enjoyed privileges that set them apart from the majority of Rome's enslaved population. Their days were filled with books and conversation, not back-breaking labor. But further down the social ladder, another class of slaves endured a reality so grim that even the scholar's chains seemed light by comparison. Their world was one of darkness and exhaustion, where survival was measured not in years, but in months. 6 months to live if you were sent to the Roman silver mines. Your future was decided the moment you arrived. The phrase 6 months to live wasn't an exaggeration. It was the grim reality for thousands forced underground each year. The mines of Spain, especially, gained a reputation for being places where hope vanished fast. Diodorus Siculus, who witnessed the aftermath, wrote that slaves died by day and night, and that death often seemed preferable to the life they endured below ground. Imagine crawling through tunnels so narrow you had to drag yourself on your belly, hundreds of feet beneath the earth. The only light came from smoky torches, their fumes mixing with metallic dust that clung to every breath. The air was thick, stale, and poisoned by the very minerals workers were forced to extract. The further you went, the hotter it got, until sweat ran in rivers and breathing turned into a struggle. There was no pause in this world. Work continued around the clock. Slaves formed human chains, passing heavy sacks of silver ore up rickety ladders. Some tunnels were so low that miners had to chip away at the ceiling while lying flat on their backs, stone dust falling into their mouths and eyes. Collapses happened all the time. If a tunnel caved in, the overseers didn't dig out the trapped. They just sent in replacements and moved on. Archaeologists have found skeletons clutching their tools, crushed where they worked, evidence of lives ended mid-task. But the most insidious killer wasn't falling rock or suffocating dust. It was mercury. Romans used mercury to separate silver from ore, a process that required stirring vats of toxic sludge by hand. Slaves inhaled the fumes and absorbed the poison through their skin. Over time, mercury built up in their bodies, causing tremors, hallucinations, and organ failure. Many lost their grip on reality before their bodies finally gave out. Excavations in Spain have uncovered skeletons with mercury contamination far beyond normal levels, a silent record of exposure that outlasted the empire itself. There was no rest, no sick days, and no mercy. Overseers drove the workers relentlessly, whips in hand, expecting everyone to keep pace or be discarded. The health of the enslaved was never a priority. What mattered was the rate of silver extracted. If someone slowed down, they were left behind. Mass graves near ancient mines are filled with skeletons showing old fractures and injuries, proof that many worked through pain until they simply couldn't anymore. Restraints didn't end with the living. In one Spanish mine, archaeologists found skeletons still locked in iron collars, the metal fused to bone. These people died in chains, forced to keep working even when illness or injury made it impossible to stand. One set of remains belonged to a teenager whose spine was permanently damaged from carrying overloaded baskets up ladders. His vertebrae were compressed like those of an elderly man, even though he probably hadn't survived more than a few months in the mine. The scale was staggering. Some mines burned through tens of thousands of slaves every year just to keep up with demand. That meant more than 100 deaths a day across the empire's mining regions. Spanish silver didn't just pay for Rome's armies and monuments. It was the backbone of the entire economy. Every coin minted in Rome had passed through the hands of these workers, yet not a single one bore their name. Why did the system tolerate such waste? The answer was cold economics. New slaves from military campaigns or pirate raids were cheaper than caring for those already in the mines. A captive bought for a modest sum could extract many times their purchase price in silver before dying. Providing better food, medical care, or safer working conditions would have cut into profits. Mine owners calculated exactly how little they could spend to keep output high, treating people as disposable resources. Surviving wills from mine owners reveal this mindset. One owner advised his heirs to work the slaves hard, but avoid buying weak Easterners who died too quickly. Another left instructions on how to use the whip to maximize productivity without causing immediate collapse. This wasn't about cruelty for its own sake. It was the logic of Roman business, where efficiency always came first. To keep the workforce under control, overseers combined threats with occasional rewards. New arrivals were sometimes forced to witness harsh punishments, a warning of what could happen if they disobeyed. At other times, the most productive workers received extra food or small privileges, turning the enslaved against each other. Rumors circulated that good behavior might bring freedom, but in reality, almost no one ever escaped the mines alive. The worst jobs went to those who resisted or broke the rules. Troublemakers were sent to the deepest, hottest tunnels, where temperatures soared and air was scarce. Some were chained to millstones, grinding ore for hours until their hands became twisted and deformed. Archaeologists have found skeletons with enlarged wrists and arthritic fingers, signs of endless repetitive labor. Chronic dehydration was common. Some workers chewed rocks to suck out the last traces of moisture, wearing their teeth down to stubs. Children were not spared. Their small bodies could squeeze into spaces adults couldn't reach, making them valuable, but especially vulnerable. In Spanish mines, graves have revealed skeletons of children as young as 8, their bones stunted and misshapen from years of carrying heavy loads. Skulls show multiple healed fractures, likely from beatings. Few children survived more than a year in the mines. Diodorus observed that slaves died in large numbers, yet the mines were never short of workers. When one group perished, traders delivered another. The historian even noted that some slaves welcomed death, seeing it as a release from suffering. There are accounts of people provoking their overseers, hoping for a beating severe enough to end their misery quickly, rather than waiting for poison or exhaustion to take its toll. Still, the system wasn't perfect. There were moments of resistance. In one uprising, Spanish slaves overpowered their guards with mining tools, briefly taking control of the site before being crushed by Roman soldiers. More often, resistance was subtle, sabotaging equipment, mislabeling ore, or passing warnings to new arrivals about the most brutal overseers. These small acts were dangerous, but they allowed workers to reclaim a bit of dignity in a world designed to strip it away. The indifference of Rome's elite was striking. Senators and merchants enjoyed the wealth that silver brought, rarely considering its source. The poet Martial once joked about Spanish silver being washed in barbarian sweat. a line that captured the casual disregard for the lives fueling the empire's luxury. When a governor tried to improve mine conditions, he was quickly removed for interfering with profits. The mines operated for centuries, leaving scars not just on the landscape, but in the stories of those who passed through them. Today, the soil around ancient Spanish mines still contains dangerous levels of mercury, a toxic legacy of Rome's relentless pursuit of wealth. Later visitors, centuries after the empire fell, found bones blackened and twisted, silent witnesses to lives spent in darkness. These mines were not just places of labor. They were sites of relentless exploitation, where human beings were reduced to numbers in an endless calculation of profit. The silver that glittered in Rome's temples and coinage came at a cost few cared to acknowledge. Every ounce was paid for with human suffering, every fortune built on the backs of those who never saw daylight again. Yet even in the face of such overwhelming odds, enslaved people found ways to push back. When open rebellion was impossible, they turned to quieter forms of resistance. Some risked everything for a chance at freedom, despite the dangers that awaited those who tried to escape. For many, the hope of slipping away, of making it past the guards and into the world beyond, became the last spark that kept them moving, even as Rome did everything it could to keep them in chains. The collar that spoke for enslaved people in Rome, even the faintest hope of escape came with a heavy price, sometimes literally. The city's answer to runaway slaves was as practical as it was cruel, the collar that spoke for its wearer. These metal bands, often made of iron or bronze, weren't just restraints. They were public announcements, designed to turn the person wearing one into a walking notice board. Roman slave collars were permanently fastened around the neck, with some weighing more than 2 pounds. Their real power lay in the words stamped or engraved into the metal. The inscriptions acted as instructions to anyone who might encounter the runaway. One collar, now in the British Museum, reads, "Hold me and return me to my master Viventius." Others gave even more details, identifying the slave's name, the master's name, and the location where the slave should be returned. One surviving example states, "I am Marcellus, slave of Praetectus, who is an official in the department of the grain supply. I have escaped from my post. Detain me, for I have run away. Take me back to the barber's shops near the Temple of Flora." Imagine having your status and your owner's instructions displayed for everyone to see, every moment of your life. The collar's psychological impact was as significant as their physical discomfort. To wear one was to carry a constant reminder of your status, and to know that everyone you passed could read your story. Some collars even mentioned rewards for return, paid out by the master to anyone who brought a runaway back. The message was clear. The city itself was enlisted in policing the enslaved, and every citizen became a potential informant or captor. Slave owners didn't rely solely on these collars. They had professional help. The fugitivarii, professional slave catchers, roamed the streets, countryside, and ports, working on commission. These bounty hunters specialized in tracking down runaways, using their knowledge of slave routes, hiding places, and the habits of those desperate enough to risk escape. They kept lists and descriptions, sometimes noting distinguishing marks, accents, or habits. Their job was to bring back as many fugitives as possible for a fee. The law supported their work at every turn. Roman legal codes included entire sections devoted to the procedures for recapturing runaway slaves. If you found a slave, you were legally required to return them. Refusing to do so could result in fines equal to the slave's value. Special courts settled disputes over ownership. and there were rules about how to advertise a found slave before claiming them as your own. The legal system made it clear. The rights of slave owners were paramount, and the machinery of the state existed to protect their property. For runaways, daily life was a minefield. Public spaces were filled with notices offering rewards for the return of escaped slaves. These ads included detailed descriptions. Greek male, about 30, missing front tooth, burn scar on left arm. Owners often listed unique habits or speech patterns, such as stutters when nervous or sings while working. Any personal trait could be used as an identifier. The city's bars, markets, and taverns became places of risk. Anyone could recognize you, and anyone could turn you in. Wealthier households took even more precautions. Some kept trained dogs that could identify slaves by scent. Others imposed constant surveillance, with rotating shifts to ensure that slaves watched each other. There were even systems where the failure of one slave to prevent another's escape resulted in punishment for both. The pressure to stay put was relentless and came from all directions. The design of the collars themselves changed over time. Early versions were plain metal bands. Later, they became more elaborate, sometimes including extra loops for chaining groups together. Archaeologists have found skeletons still wearing these collars centuries later. The metal fused to bone, a stark reminder of how permanent this mark of enslavement could be. The measures seem extreme, but they were a response to a real problem. Escape attempts were common enough that notices for recapture appeared everywhere. Professional slave catchers kept busy, and the possibility of escape was always on the minds of both slaves and their owners. The fact that so much effort went into preventing and reversing escapes shows just how persistent the desire for freedom was. Some enslaved people became experts in disguise and deception. They learned enough Latin to pass as free citizens or forged documents declaring their freedom. Others tried to blend in by adopting new identities, posing as sailors, merchants, or laborers. There are stories of women pretending to be pregnant to avoid harsh punishment, since Roman law forbade executing pregnant slaves. Some even went so far as to scar their own faces, making themselves harder to recognize and less valuable if caught. The risks, however, were enormous. If caught, runaways faced a strict hierarchy of punishments. First-time offenders might receive a whipping or be forced to wear heavier chains. Repeat attempts could lead to branding, often on the face or forehead, with marks that identified them as fugitives. Some were tattooed with warnings like, "Stop me, I'm a runaway." In the most severe cases, especially for those considered incorrigible, the punishment could be crucifixion. The system was designed to deter escape, but also to avoid destroying valuable property when possible. Skilled slaves might be punished in ways that kept them working, such as being shackled or reassigned to unpleasant duties. Not all collars threatened violence. Some simply offered instructions or rewards. "I am the slave of Felix the Archdeacon. If I flee, return me to the Lateran Palace." Whether this reflected a gentler approach or simply a different strategy is up for debate. Some historians suggest Christian owners may have used guilt or social pressure as much as force. But the message remained unchanged. The person wearing the collar was not free. Fugitivari developed their own tactics, lurking near temples where runaways might seek sanctuary, watching the roads leading out of the city, or posing as travelers in need of help. Sometimes they even tricked runaways by pretending to offer protection, only to turn them in for a reward. The entire system was stacked against those who tried to break free. Legal loopholes sometimes offered a glimmer of hope. In certain cities, a slave who managed to live undetected for a year could claim limited freedom, but the protection ended if they left city limits. Masters exploited these rules, sending agents to lure runaways just beyond the boundary, where recapture became legal again. The process was a constant game of cat and mouse, with the odds always favoring the pursuers. The physical collars themselves have become silent witnesses to this history. Some bear inscriptions in both Latin and local languages, hinting at the diverse origins of those enslaved after conquests. Others show signs of alteration, where previous owners' names were scratched out and replaced. The metal carries the scars of lives spent in fear and uncertainty, long after the people themselves are gone. Public attitudes toward runaways varied. Some citizens eagerly turned in fugitives for the reward, while others quietly offered food or directions. Graffiti from Pompeii reveals this split. Some images praise slave catchers as heroes, while others mock them as fools. The economic cost of escape was real. Owners lost labor, paid rewards, and sometimes hired professional catchers. Manuals advise careful accounting to minimize these losses, treating slaves as assets to be managed. Despite all these barriers, people still ran. The persistence of escape attempts speaks volumes about the conditions of Roman slavery. Every new shackle, every law, every public punishment was a sign that the system could not fully extinguish the human drive for freedom. Today, the collars remain. Their inscriptions faded but still legible after 2,000 years. They outlasted the people who wore them, the masters who ordered them, and the empire that depended on their message. Yet the system of control, for all its ingenuity and brutality, could not contain the most explosive threat of all. Sometimes, resistance did not come in the form of a lone escape. Sometimes, it erupted into open revolt, and when that happened, even the might of Rome was put to the test. Spartacus's shadow. When people today think of slave resistance in ancient Rome, one name towers above the rest: Spartacus. His story didn't begin with a grand declaration or a mass uprising, but with a small group of gladiators, about 78 men, according to ancient sources, breaking out of a training school in Capua. Spartacus, a Thracian who had once served in the Roman army before being enslaved, was among them. What started as a desperate escape quickly caught fire. Word spread, and soon, slaves from the countryside and the cities alike began slipping away to join the rebels. According to some ancient estimates, Spartacus eventually amassed up to 120,000 followers, a number that rivaled the size of Roman legions, though most historians agree the actual count was likely lower. Still, the force grew large enough to shake the entire Roman Republic. The reasons behind this swelling army were rooted in the daily misery of Roman slavery. Spartacus and his companions weren't just fighting for their own freedom. They tapped into a deep well of frustration and longing among Rome's enslaved and impoverished people. The rebels offered a vision, however rough, of life outside bondage. That hope and the promise of turning the tables on their masters drew thousands to their side. Some came from rural estates, others from city workshops. There were farmhands, miners, cooks, and even people who had once served as soldiers. This wasn't just a mob. It became a functioning army, organized with surprising discipline and fueled by a powerful sense of purpose. The Senate, at first, didn't take the threat seriously. Rome had seen slave revolts before. None had ever lasted long. They sent inexperienced commanders with small forces, thinking a handful of soldiers could put down the rebellion. But Spartacus's group proved different. They seized weapons and armor from their first victories, training themselves in Roman tactics. They learned to fight as a unit, set up supply lines, and even forge their own weapons. After each defeat, the rebels grew stronger, their confidence building with every Roman retreat. One of the most striking moments came as the rebel army moved through southern Italy. They passed stretches of the Via Appia, the great road lined with the remains of rebels from earlier uprisings, grim reminders of Rome's usual response to defiance. Spartacus's forces turned this terror tactic back on Rome, crucifying captured Roman soldiers along the same route. It was a message, both to the Senate and to every enslaved person watching from the fields. The balance of power could shift. As the revolt dragged on, panic crept into the Roman elite. Wealthy Romans, seeing the crosses along the roads, grew anxious about conspiracies and the possibility that their own slaves might rise up. Reports of entire estates emptying overnight sent shivers through the countryside. The fear wasn't just about violence. It was about the realization that the enslaved, if united, could threaten the very foundations of Roman society. Seneca later wrote that the Senate considered measures to make slaves more easily identifiable, such as requiring distinctive clothing, but abandoned the idea out of fear that it would reveal to slaves just how many of them there were compared to their masters. The Senate's response escalated. They mobilized 8 legions, a force larger than what had been sent against some of Rome's greatest external enemies. The general Marcus Licinius Crassus took command and imposed harsh discipline on his own troops, including decimation, executing every 10th man in units that faltered. Spartacus's army, meanwhile, continued to outmaneuver Roman forces. They built fortifications, used psychological tricks like propping up corpses in armor to inflate their apparent numbers, and moved with a speed and adaptability that caught Roman commanders off guard. The rebels even tried to cross to Sicily, seeking to spark more uprisings, though this plan ultimately failed. For nearly 2 years, from 73 to 71 BC, Spartacus and his followers held out. They won battles, evaded capture, and kept the Roman military machine on its heels. The rebels were not just surviving, they were winning, at least for a time. Their tactics, including psychological warfare, resourceful use of terrain, and the ability to train and equip new recruits, revealed a level of organization that many Romans had not believed possible among slaves. But the tide eventually turned. Crassus, reinforced by legions recalled from other provinces, managed to trap the rebels in southern Italy. The final battle was brutal. Spartacus was killed, his body never found, and the rebellion collapsed. The aftermath was as harsh as the revolt itself. According to Plutarch and later sources, over 6,000 captured rebels were crucified along the Via Appia, the road from Capua to Rome. For miles, the sight of bodies hanging from crosses served as a chilling warning to anyone who might consider following in Spartacus's footsteps. The shockwaves from the revolt lasted long after the last cross had fallen. The Senate debated drastic new controls, including proposals to ban slave gatherings of more than 3 people, and to restrict the use of certain languages, such as Gallic or Thracian, in group settings. These measures aimed to disrupt communication and prevent future conspiracies. Slave traders and wealthy Romans began to prefer enslaved people from different regions, hoping language barriers would keep them from organizing. The legal system adapted, always with an eye toward preventing another uprising on the scale of Spartacus's. The psychological impact was profound. The revolt had exposed the weaknesses of the Roman system. It showed that enslaved people could organize, plan, and fight with skill and determination. it also revealed the deep anxieties of the ruling class. The philosopher Seneca described how the Senate, after the revolt, rejected a proposal to kill